On the 5th of November 1956, British and French troops stormed ashore at port, said at the northern mouth of the Suez Canal. Warships bombarded the coast. Paratroopers dropped from the sky. Within days, the Allied force, 80,000 strong, was clawing its way down the canal, smashing the Egyptian army in front of it. It looked like the British Empire flexing its muscle one more time. And it was the week that Empire died, because while those soldiers were winning, they were losing everything that mattered. The real battle wasn't in the desert. It was over oil, and over a currency, and over who got to tell the great powers what to do. To understand how, you have to understand one thin strip of water. In the middle of the 19th century, a French diplomat named Ferdinand de Lesseps pulled off something most people said was impossible. He carved a canal through the Egyptian desert, 100 miles of it, joining the Mediterranean to the Red Sea. When it opened in 1869, it let a ship sail from Europe to Asia without going all the way around Africa. Weeks of travel simply vanished. The canal sat on Egyptian soil, but it wasn't really Egypt's. It was run by a private company, owned mostly by British and French shareholders. To London and Paris, it was the jugular vein of empire, how troops moved east, how oil reached Europe from the fields of the Middle East. Here is the number to hold in your head. By the mid-1950s, about 2 out of every 3 barrels of oil that kept Western Europe running had come through that canal. 2/3 of the fuel for an entire continent, along one ditch in the desert. Turn that tap off and Europe's lights go dim within weeks. And a man in Cairo was about to use that knowledge like a weapon. His name was Gamal Abdel Nasser, an Egyptian army officer, still in his 30s, who had helped throw out the old king in a coup in 1952 and climbed to the top. He became the face of something spreading across the Arab world, a fierce pride, a refusal to be ordered around by London and Paris anymore. His signature project was the Aswan High Dam, a colossal wall across the Nile that would generate electricity and remake the country. The dam would cost a fortune. For a while, the United States and Britain had agreed to help pay for it, but Nasser had also been quietly buying weapons from the Soviet Union, playing the Americans and the Russians off each other. That enraged the Americans. On the 19th of July, 1956, the Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, abruptly yanked the American funding. Britain followed. The offer was dead. To Nasser, this was a public humiliation, and he already had his answer for how to pay for the dam himself. There was a river of money flowing right through his country. He just had to claim it. A week later, on the 26th of July, 1956, Nasser stood on a stage in Alexandria, the speech broadcast across the Arab world by radio. And in the middle of it, he said the name of the man who'd built the canal 100 years before. Ferdinand de Lesseps. He said it again, de Lesseps. That name was a signal. The instant he spoke it, Egyptian officers across the country walked into the offices of the Suez Canal Company and took control. Egypt was seizing the canal. From that moment, the tolls every ship paid would belong to Egypt and pay for the Aswan Dam. Now, there had been a treaty. It said the canal would eventually pass to Egyptian control, but not until 1968. Nasser was taking it 12 years early, by force, in an afternoon. For Britain and France, it was a swaggering, deliberate slap. Their empire's throat, snatched away, live on the radio. In London, the Prime Minister was Anthony Eden, a smooth, elegant career diplomat who had helped build the entire order that came out of the Second World War. He'd only been in office a year, and Eden had spent the 1930s watching the dictators of Europe rise. He looked at Nasser and saw another Mussolini. He became convinced that if Nasser wasn't stopped now, the whole Middle East would fall, the oil would be lost, and they'd be fighting a much bigger war in a few years. France felt the same, with a sharper reason. Its Prime Minister, Guy Mollet, was drowning in a colonial war in Algeria, and Nasser was funneling guns to the Algerian rebels. France wanted Nasser gone. So the two old powers started to plan a war. But they couldn't just invade. They needed a cover story. And here the story turns into a conspiracy. In late October 1956, in a quiet villa outside Paris called Sevres, the British, the French, and a third party sat down in secret. That third party was Israel, which had its own long score to settle with Egypt, represented by its founding Prime Minister, David Ben Gurion, and his defense minister, Moshe Dayan. France acted as the matchmaker. They drew up a written, signed agreement. Elegant in its cynicism, Israel would attack Egypt across the Sinai. Then Britain and France would step in pretending to be the peacemakers. They'd issue an ultimatum to both sides, demanding they pull back from the canal. They knew Egypt would refuse, and the moment it did, Britain and France would invade the canal, all in the name of separating the combatants and protecting the waterway. It was a manufactured excuse, a plot to grab the canal and topple Nasser, dressed up as a rescue mission. On the 29th of October, Israel attacked, right on schedule. 2 days later, British and French bombers were in the skies over Egypt. On the 4th and 5th of November, the troops went ashore at port, said, right where we came in. For a little while, it worked. The Allied force rode down the canal. Egyptian resistance crumbled. By every measure of the battlefield, Britain and France were winning. But the Americans figured it out almost immediately. Their intelligence could see the timing. Israel's attack, the perfectly convenient ultimatum, the instant invasion. It was too neat. And President Dwight Eisenhower was furious. Here were his closest allies starting a war behind his back, lying to him about it, right in the middle of an American election, and right as Soviet tanks were crushing an uprising in Hungary. He called what they'd done a cabal, and he decided to make them stop. But Eisenhower wasn't going to send troops. He had a quieter weapon. He had money. After the Second World War, the British pound was still one of the great currencies of the world. Lots of countries, especially the old bits of the empire like India and Pakistan, kept big piles of pounds in their vaults and used them to trade. It was the money the world trusted, second only to the dollar. But the war had bled Britain dry. To keep that trust alive, the Bank of England kept a careful floor under the pound, always holding at least $2 billion in gold and foreign reserves. That number was the magic line. As long as the vault stayed above $2 billion, the world believed the pound was solid. The instant it fell below, every trader would assume the pound was about to be worth less, and they'd all rush to dump theirs before that happened, which would make it happen faster. A bank run, but for a whole country. Now look at what Nasser did when the bombs started falling. He ordered ships sunk in the canal. At least 8 or 9 vessels scuttled right in the channel. Plugging it up, the pipeline carrying oil from Iraq to the sea was sabotaged. And on the 7th of November, Saudi Arabia declared it would not let any ship carrying oil for Britain or France unload at its ports. The Arab world had picked up a weapon no one had really seen used before. It turned off the oil. The effect was instant and frightening. The canal was blocked for months. Europe had perhaps 2 weeks of crude oil left in its tanks. Even sending every tanker the long way around Africa wasn't enough. Britain ordered fuel cuts of 10% for nearly everyone. And petrol rationing came back, the kind people remembered from the war, lasting until the following spring. And as the oil dried up, the money started to bleed. Everyone holding pounds got scared. They watched Egypt's assets get seized, and they thought, that could be my money next. So they pulled it out. Foreign investors, central banks, anyone with pounds started trading them for dollars, getting their cash out of London before the roof came down. In a single week, the Bank of England watched $100 million walk out the door, with losses on track to top $200 million for the month. And Britain now had to buy its oil in expensive dollars instead of cheap pounds, which burned through the reserves even faster. The vault was sliding toward that magic line of $2 billion, and there was nothing to stop it. Here is the thing. You can't bomb a bank run. You can't shell a currency. And now Eisenhower moved in for the kill. He told the British, flat out, that the United States would block them from getting emergency loans from the world's lender of last resort, unless they agreed to a ceasefire. And his people let it be known that if Britain didn't back down, the Americans might start selling off the British debt they themselves held, which would have crashed the pound overnight. At the same time, the other superpower leaned in. The Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev roared about British imperialism and threatened to rain rockets down on London and Paris. and sent volunteers to fight in Egypt. Whether he would really have done it, no one quite knew. But with Soviet tanks already in the streets of Budapest, no one wanted to find out. The threat, real or bluster, was enough. So on the 6th of November 1956, Britain gave in. A ceasefire took hold that night. The United Nations rushed in the first peacekeeping force it had ever created to stand between the armies. Over the following weeks, the British and the French packed up and sailed home. Israel pulled out of the Sinai under American pressure. The canal itself stayed blocked until the following April, when Egypt finally cleared it and reopened it. And to keep the pound from collapsing, Britain had to go hat in hand to the very lender Eisenhower had threatened to deny them. In December, they borrowed over $560 million, with nearly $750 million more held in reserve, just to refill the vault they drained. Think about that. The greatest empire in modern history had won every battle it fought, held the canal in its grip, had the enemy on the run, and then had to abandon the field and beg for a loan, because a third party wouldn't let it pay its own bills. And the cost wasn't only money. Anthony Eden resigned on the 9th of January, 1957. He'd been prime minister for less than 2 years. He went home a broken man. He had lied to his parliament and to his people about the conspiracy at Sevres, about whether the attack had been planned with Israel all along. His foreign secretary had stood up and sworn there was no prior agreement. And it was all a lie. The very thing Eden had built his career on. His reputation for honor and diplomacy was gone. But the real meaning of Suez ran deeper than one man's fall. It was the moment the map of power was redrawn, and everyone could see it. Britain and France had proved, in front of the whole world, that they could no longer act on their own. They could field armies, they could win fights, but they could not defy the United States, and they could not survive a financial squeeze. The Americans themselves concluded that Britain, stripped of its grip on Middle Eastern oil, would almost certainly sink to a second-rate power. Never again would Britain launch a major operation without American permission. The empire wasn't ended by a defeat in battle. It was ended by a balance sheet. France drew the opposite lesson, but an equally bitter one. Paris decided it could never rely on the Anglo-Saxons again. Within a decade, France pulled its armies out of NATO's shared command and pushed even harder to build its own nuclear bomb. If America could cut off the money over Suez, France wanted a weapon no one could take away. The Middle East itself changed hands. For a century, it had been an Anglo-French backyard. Now it became a Cold War chessboard. Within weeks of the ceasefire, Eisenhower announced what came to be called his doctrine, that the United States would use force to stop any Soviet advance in the region. The first time America promised to police the Arab world itself, taking the seat Britain had just been thrown out of. And in Cairo, Nasser had lost the war and won everything else. Beaten on the battlefield by Israel, he nonetheless strode away as the towering hero of the Arab world. The man who had stared down the old empires. Arab nationalism surged, and across Africa and Asia, the colonized saw how thin the old power's armor really was. The age of empire began to unravel even faster. But maybe the most important thing born that week was an idea. For the first time, a group of countries had shown that they could turn off the flow of oil and bring a great power to its knees without firing a shot at it. The Saudi embargo, the blocked canal, the fuel rationing in the streets of London, they were a proof of concept. The world had just learned that oil could be a weapon. It would remember. 17 years later, in 1973, it would remember again, and the lesson would hit the whole world at once. And there is one last honest detail. The actual economic damage from the closed canal didn't last. The canal reopened within months. Egypt proved it could run the thing without any European help. In purely material terms, the crisis was a bump, not a catastrophe. But that is not what made Suez a turning point. What died in 1956 wasn't a canal or a shipment of oil. It was an idea that Britain and France still held about themselves. The belief that they sat at the very top table of the world, that the maps were still drawn in their languages. The soldiers came home from port, said having won. Their countries came home having lost an empire, and they never quite got it back.